Founded by German immigrants in 1830, Capital University is a small Lutheran liberal arts school located in Bexley, Ohio. In the 1930s at Capital, the German Lutheran tradition revived after a period of decline following the Great War. World War II forced students and alumni at Cap to separate their German identity and the Lutheran tradition. Miss Dorothea Conrad is a prime example of the struggle many faced reconciling German identity and Lutheranism. Born in 1898 to a prominent Lutheran family, she lived in German Village right across Schiller Park with her parents, and witnessed the rise of anti-German sentiment throughout the community.
At that time, it was undergoing a great transition. There's, of course, a language transition, which was well underway even before World War I, not without controversy. In the churches, it was sometimes very controversial. There were a couple of old German Lutheran churches who never allowed English services. There were others who had both German and English, and eventually there were some who switched over entirely to English. And then comes the First World War, not only discrimination, but persecution, really. Here in Columbus, one of the things that happened was they rounded up German breed dogs, Schnauzers and German Shepherds, et cetera, et cetera. Took them to Schiller Park and slaughtered them. Dorothea Conrad would have been in that social situation at that time. And so, there was no pride in German Village. They were getting the heck out of Dodge as fast as they could. Most people were either hunkering down or just becoming great patriots. They gave up the German language. They downplayed the Germanness of the Lutheran Church. They did all these things. So by World War II, that transition was fairly well along.
Dorothea Conrad, head librarian and professor at Capital University, was an important figure in the lives of students. She traveled the world, defied cultural norms, and dedicated her life to her love of books and history. The National Write a Letter campaign became popular among those left behind at Capital. In 1942, the editor of the Chimes, James Kirkpatrick, organized Capital's letter-writing campaign, which also sent copies of the Chimes in the Bulletin. Over the next 3 years, students sent over 5,000 letters a month to over 600 deployed Capital students and alum. Knowing they would eventually be drafted, many young men decided to enlist. James Kirkpatrick enlisted in the Army Air Force on November 14, 1942, and soon after quickly married fellow Capital student Ann Shoup. After his wife visited him while he was stationed in the U.S., he wrote,
October 31st, 1943. Dear Miss Conrad, please excuse me for not having written sooner, but believe me, I've been kept busy since my arrival here from Boise on August 1st. Anne came out in the latter part of September, and we have been quite busy taking in all the various scenic spots. So this weekend was homecoming. I know of one person who would have liked to have been there. Time to go. Sincerely, Jim.
One of the first Capital faculty to be drafted was Capital alumnus and standout academic Karl Hertz. He grew up in rural Canada as the son of a German immigrant mother. After attending Brown for graduate school, he returned to Capital to teach and attend Trinity Lutheran Seminary. Hertz soon rose to the rank of staff sergeant. He was initially stationed at Fordham University, where he prepared to become a German interpreter. In his first of 19 letters to Miss Conrad, he wrote,
July 25th, 1943. Dear Miss Conrad, I spent about an hour yesterday afternoon browsing the books at the Barnes & Noble store on 18th Street, and became quite nostalgic in the process. Our courses, as you probably noted above, are aiming at a thorough and detailed knowledge of whatever European country we are studying. Germany in my case. We also have a detailed course in world politics, giving us a background on the war. The text is lousy. Our teacher, on the other hand, is excellent. We started off disliking him, but we are cutting him down to our size, handing it back as fast as he can hand it out. Sincerely, Karl Hertz.
Elected in 1912 as the 8th president of Capital, Dr. Otto Mees served the university for 34 years. Early in his life, Mees studied at the Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital, and afterwards spent a year studying abroad at the University of Berlin in Germany. Mees founded the Conservatory of Music and led the university through 2 global wars and the Great Depression. He was known to care deeply for all of his students. Back in Bexley, Capital University continued to feel the growing pressure of war. The Selective Training and Service Act was enacted for the third time in 1941. However, anti-war sentiments appeared around the country, most notably on college campuses. Even at Capitol, President Mees was against the Conscription Act, pushing students and faculty to decline the draft. At the start of the 1941 school year, Mees took a leave of absence, citing health reasons caused by anxiety related to the war. With President Mees still on leave, on December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor, a United States naval base, was attacked by Japanese forces. This propelled the U.S. into war, fundamentally changing politics on campus.
Dear Miss Conrad, I was lucky enough to get a pretty good look at Pearl Harbor and Hickam Field, and had a Pearl Harbor veteran explain how it all happened. Besides these historical spots, I also managed to get a good look-see at Honolulu, Waikiki, and a few other smaller spots that we hurriedly passed over. I'll still take the States.
At the start of the 1942-43 school year, Dr. Mees returned to Capitol as president. During his break, Mees was treated for severe anxiety. Unfortunately, the treatment, shots of arsenic, inadvertently caused blindness. Despite his physical state, Mees advocated for students' mental health. The presence of war on campus was undeniable. Over 200 soldiers lived and trained on campus. Accelerated degree programs were offered for students to graduate prior to deployment. Women were still required to have escorts, and with most of the men gone, most student organizations shut down, including the Germania Club. Established in the late 19th century, the Germania Club stood as Capitol's longest-running club for decades, celebrating German culture, society, and politics. The group of students revived and remained prominent through the 20s and 30s. However, in a 1938 issue of the Chimes, Germania Club is parodied with an intense mention of German nationalism and goose step. Meanwhile, in Europe, tensions build and Hitler's persecution increases. Mees was proud to represent a German Lutheran university, but struggled to separate German heritage from the atrocities being committed in Europe. In 1944, President Mees confronted the Churchman, a national Protestant magazine, and challenged their assertion that Lutheranism is essentially German.
Our attention has been called to an article entitled German Protestantism. May we call your attention to just a few misstatements? Lutheranism is essentially German, the author says, at a time when thinking men in all parts of the world are praying and laboring for the unification of Christendom. It is deplorable that an article should appear in a reputable religious journal which can only serve to drive the wedge of suspicion and prejudice more deeply into the church.
He resisted the identification of Lutheranism and German life and culture too tightly because World War I had brought to light a number of realities about what was happening politically in Germany.
Mees's response is in part that wanting to be patriotic and to say, we are not being unfaithful, we are not siding with the enemy of the United States. There's another component to it as well, the religious component. And so to say Lutherans aren't all German is also a way of saying, keep the main thing the main thing. It's not about the blood that flows in our veins. It's about this central witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that transcends culture.
Now, one of Luther's basic tenets of theology was the notion that there are two kingdoms, a kingdom on the right and a kingdom on the left, a kingdom of this world and a kingdom sort of transcendent and beyond this world, and that God uses both realms in order to promote justice. Therefore, Luther taught that we should honor civil authorities when they act in a godly way. But when they stray, when they become not life-giving, when they become as deadly as the National Socialist program did, then it's our obligation to speak truth to power and, if necessary, even put our own lives on the line. In the Lord's Prayer in German, one prays, "Thy kingdom come." In German, it's "Dein Reich komme." And at the end of the prayer, "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory," it's "Dein ist das Reich." those very words in the Lord's Prayer were used by the Nazis, and even as they co-opted Luther's theology, in some ways tried to give some religious theological legitimacy to this terribly wicked program of death and oppression.
May 24th, 1945. Dear Miss Conrad, just another one of your world tourists checking in from a slightly different location than the last one. Would you please be kind enough to give my new address to the publications office, since I would like to continue to receive the bulletin, etc. Thank you. Anne writes that she has had Susan up to the library for your inspection. What do you think of the young lady? As far as I'm concerned, this war can end any time now, since I would like to get back to make my daughter's acquaintance before she graduates from high school. Sincerely, Jim K.
In 1945, pressure on German Lutherans intensified. Karl Hertz served as part of the 120th Evacuation Hospital, tasked with taking care of newly freed prisoners at Buchenwald concentration camp. The platoon recorded the events of their journey in a published scrapbook. Hertz mailed a personal copy of Buchenwald and Beyond, 120th Evac, to Miss Conrad, which remains in Capital University's library circulation. Hertz also wrote her an 8-page letter on German stationery depicting what he had seen.
May 4th, 45. Dear Miss Conrad, let me first start off with my first contact with Buchenwald. We came up the hill and out of the woods, a barbed wire fence 11 strands high. Watchtowers were spaced at irregular intervals all around the place. In the camp, on the roads, in the woods, everywhere one went, one found the athelings, weak, emaciated caricatures of human beings, still wearing the symbol of their confinement. The number tattoo on the wrist, the patch indicating nationality seen on the left breast of the jacket. Buchenwald Hospital was our job. We were the first medics to get there. We did what we could, but nothing could be done for the 50,000 dead. These were those still strong enough to walk. These were those who collapsed from starvation and torture, who lay where they fell and often died where they lay. And beyond the carts were the crematoriums. Buchenwald was a political camp. Thus, the prisoners included Germany's foremost writers, scientists, and artists. They organized themselves into a highly integrated underground government and ran their own society under the nose of the SS Watchmen. They maintained themselves through subterfuge, cunning, and infinite precautions. When the first American tanks were spotted entering a nearby town, the prisoners attacked from the rear and captured both the camp and the SS troops. Startling and almost beyond belief is the attitude of the German people. Their attitude is one of indifference. They know, for we have shown them, yet they refuse to know. They refuse to face the facts. They have hardened their hearts. Is the material loss measurable in the homes destroyed, industries blasted to ruin, and fortunes burned up in incendiary raids? It is a moral loss, felt in a loss of national honor, independence, and dignity. It is a loss of every foundation of their lives. Lest you ask questions about this stationery, it was just one way of getting around the paper shortage. Sincerely, Karl.
On August 6th and 8th, 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, forcing them to surrender. Jim Kirkpatrick wrote a letter to Miss Conrad while he was stationed in Guam regarding the news.
Guam, August 22nd, 1945. Dear Miss Conrad, the realization that man now possesses the means to wipe himself off the face of the earth has penetrated in everyone's mind out here, and they did and do not relish the prospect of another war at any time. But ever since that July 2nd issue of Life, which made Guam into a tropical paradise, well, shall we say that I have lost faith in Life magazine? Must tend to a few duties now, so goodbye, please.
Jim Kay.
On September 2nd, 1945, the Second World War finally came to a close. With over 85 million people deceased, countries around the world retired their arms. President Mees commented on the victory.
When rejoicing in or gloating over our victory, we as people are prone to overlook the high price it cost and to forget, at least for the moment, those who paid the price that we might celebrate this victory. That is the challenge to all of us in this glorious hour. Otto Mees.
Over 600 Capitol students and alumni were involved in World War II, some of which had enlisted prior to the Pearl Harbor attack. During the war, Capitol hung a service flag in Mays Hall and added a gold star when a life was lost. In total, there were 22 Capitol University soldiers killed in action between the years of 1942 and 1945. Some were prisoners of war, others died in plane crashes, but most causes of the fatalities remain unknown. As the war ended and soldiers returned home, the political and cultural identity of the United States changed. When faced with the backlash of World War II, German Lutherans further embraced their American identity to separate themselves from their troubled German brethren in the Third Reich.
The Nazis, under Hitler, with the program of National Socialism, seized on the thinking of Martin Luther to support some of their most nefarious ideas. It's true that Luther, especially later in his life, not so much the early Luther, but the older he got, he became very critical of the Jewish community. He wrote and said things that today, just as people, let alone Lutheran Christians, make us cringe. In the 20th century, Lutherans in this country and all over the world began to understand that we needed to speak truth to those sayings of Luther.
The anti-Semitism of the National Socialist regime was really a challenge for a lot of Christian communities because, to put it bluntly, Jesus was a Jew. So when you have an ideology that says Judaism is wrong, the question was raised, can you be Christian and be a good Nazi? So one of the things that evolved tragically in German Lutheranism was a form of the faith that really came to justify the Nazi agenda. Sometimes people assume that the Nazis used Luther's writings. The Nazis didn't directly use Luther's writings. They were plenty anti-Semitic without any help from Martin Luther. But some of Luther's writings against the Jews made it easier for leaders in the church to justify their complicity with the Nazi agenda. Now, for what it's worth, scholars describe Luther's writings as anti-Judaic, not anti-Semitic. Luther's prejudice against Jews was based on their religion. Hitler's was based on their race. So you can make that fine point of distinction, but in some ways it's a distinction without a difference. If I'm being persecuted, does it really matter whether you're persecuting me because of my religion or race? No, because I'm still being persecuted. And that's why it's been so important for contemporary Lutherans to disavow ourselves from those writings.
After the war, various speakers came to Capitol to speak on the cognitive dissonance felt by much of the student body. Legendary pilot Eddie Rickenbacker spoke in 1946, and the year after, Pastor Martin Niemöller, known as Hitler's personal political prisoner, held a Capitol audience spellbound with his lecture regarding the power of the Word of God in the midst of such turmoil and evil. However, despite speaking out against the Nazi regime, Niemöller retained personal anti-Semitism. Nearly 4 decades later, Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel visited Capitol in 1986. He is remembered to have said, "I am surprised a Jew such as myself would be invited to give the commencement address for a Lutheran college. I wonder what Luther would have said about it." Outside Trinity Lutheran Seminary, the Promise for Life sculpture has stood tall since 1999. Crafted by Alfred Tibor, the sculpture serves as a living dedication to interfaith work.
We are a historic German Lutheran seminary,
And we are aware of the problems of Christianity in the history of anti-Semitism, German Lutherans and their complicity in the Holocaust, theologians under Hitler, the so-called Deutsche Christians who aligned themselves with Hitler in Germany. Part of that is the recognition. And then where does this seminary sit? Right in the middle of the Jewish community. And somehow it's almost like it just kind of was happenstance. All these ideas came together. Historic German Lutheran Seminary, Trinity Lutheran Seminary, sitting here in the middle of a Jewish community. And if you go down College Avenue, up here it's a mix. It's Capital University, the German Capital University and the seminary, and then Jewish community kind of up to the north, and then you go south. And there's all the Jewish institutions there. The Jewish Federation, the Heritage Village, the Jewish Community Center Federation, and the synagogue, the Orthodox synagogue. And it just seemed like a natural that we say, we are all doing this together. We are remembering together what happened. We're remembering how bad it was. We're remembering the need to continue to remember it. And as German Lutherans, we're remembering some of the church's complicity in the whole thing too. So it was just a natural kind of thing to happen.
Through Miss Conrad's preservation of Capitol's history, one can see the struggle students, faculty, and alumni faced regarding the German Lutheran tradition. Today, Capitol has worked to preserve its history and put more focus on interfaith relations. The work done by Miss Dorothea Conrad, Karl Hertz, and Otto Mees still impact Capitol and its mission to transform students across higher education.
The movement is bigger than the person, though. And the sculpture helps us remember that because it soars, because it uplifts, because it literally raises our eyes. I think Luther would have wanted us to be reminded that you don't have to be perfect to be great. And that's true of him, and it's true of any of us who desire to do something good. We shouldn't let the fact that we know we're not perfect stop us from reaching for greatness and doing things that really matter. As long as that sculpture stands there and reminds us of two things, that yes, there is a promise for life always, that's a God-given, but that there are forces in the world that are frankly just evil. And we need to have our eyes open and our minds open and our hearts open to the kind of things that we need to do to be resistors.
Through the hundreds of letters Miss Conrad received, it is evident she wrote back to every single student. Her relationship with the students is reflected in the way she is addressed in letters. Some students referred to her as boss, and others signed off with love. Miss Conrad was their main connection back to Capitol. In order to preserve their legacies, she left a box of her documents in the archives, just waiting to be found. Miss Conrad worked as Capitol's head librarian until 1966. She died 2 years later. Miss Conrad is remembered as an institution, passionate and dedicated.